poor student married 71-year-old millionaire woman. 7 days later, he was shocked by what he saw. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Imagine a life where you're struggling to make ends meet, working long hours, barely getting by. Mark Davis, a 23-year-old college student, was living that very life. His days were consumed with studying for his law degree and working part-time at a small diner just to keep food on the table. But despite his hard work, the financial burden was too much to bear. After his father's passing, Mark was left to handle the massive debts that had piled up, a heavy weight on his shoulders that seemed impossible to lift. He had dreams, he had ambition, but no matter how hard he tried, it felt like he was sinking deeper into a pit with no way out. Everything changed when Eleanor Brooks, a wealthy 71-year-old woman, entered his life in the most unexpected way. She reached out to him, offering him a proposition that seemed too strange to be true. Eleanor knew about Mark's situation. She knew about his struggles, and for reasons unknown to him at the time, she had a solution. She proposed a marriage, not for love, but for a business arrangement. In return for his hand in marriage, Eleanor would take care of all of Mark's debts, securing his future financially. At first, Mark thought it was a joke, a crazy offer from a woman he barely knew. But as the weight of his situation pressed down on him, and with no other options in sight, he agreed. He figured, what did he have to lose? A wedding with no romance, no love, just a legal contract. But as he would soon discover, things were not as simple as they seemed. On the day of the wedding, there were no extravagant celebrations, no grand parties. The ceremony was private, attended only by a lawyer and a few witnesses. Mark was unsure of what he was getting himself into. He was stepping into a world far beyond his own, a world of wealth and power. Eleanor, a woman twice his age, was a stranger to him in many ways. Her life, her struggles, her past, he knew nothing about them. But what Mark did know was that this marriage could be his way out, his chance at a better life. He signed the papers, made the promises, and walked away as her husband. But when he moved into her luxurious estate, things began to change. The house was grand, filled with the finest things money could buy. Yet, despite the opulence, Mark felt an emptiness he couldn't shake. Eleanor was kind, but distant, a woman who carried the weight of years alone. The two of them lived in the same house, but they were strangers to each other, each hiding their true feelings beneath layers of pride and silence. As the days went by, Mark started to notice small things about Eleanor. She wasn't just a cold, wealthy woman. There was a depth to her that intrigued him, a complexity that made him question everything he thought he knew about their arrangement. She had a past, a history, and though she had agreed to this marriage, there was something about her that suggested she had more to offer than just her money. What Mark didn't know was that the real story, the one that would change everything, had only just begun. Mark had barely gotten used to the sprawling luxury of Eleanor's estate when he realized just how isolated he felt. The mansion, though beautiful, felt empty to him. The cold marble floors and high ceilings that screamed wealth felt like a barrier between him and the world he had once known. He had expected to be overwhelmed by the riches that surrounded him, but instead, he found himself battling a sense of loneliness that he hadn't anticipated. Eleanor, despite her kindness, remained distant. The age gap, their arrangement, and the awkwardness of their situation kept them from forming any kind of bond beyond that of a contractual obligation. The first few days were quiet. Eleanor went about her daily routine, never asking much of him. She spent her time on business calls and meetings, while Mark was left to explore the vast home that he was now a part of. He tried to make himself comfortable, but there was an eerie stillness in the house that made him feel more like a guest than a husband. One evening, after another uneventful dinner where Eleanor barely spoke, Mark found himself wandering through the corridors, unsure of what to do. The silence was deafening, and he felt like an intruder in his own life. As he passed one of the windows overlooking the garden, he saw Eleanor sitting by the fountain, her face turned toward the setting sun. Something about the scene caught his attention. She looked peaceful, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Mark couldn't ignore. He stood there for a moment, watching her, wondering what her life had been like before this marriage. What had driven her to propose such an unusual arrangement? Was she truly just lonely, or was there something deeper behind her decision? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. Eleanor was not the woman he had expected her to be. The next morning, Mark decided to take a chance. He had spent the past few days trying to understand the woman he had married, and he felt it was time to at least try to have a real conversation with her. He found her in the garden again, this time tending to the roses. She didn't notice him approach until he was right behind her. "Good morning," he said cautiously, unsure of how to break the ice. Eleanor turned, a small smile on her lips. "Good morning, Mark. I didn't expect to see you out here. I just thought I'd join you for a bit. You seem to enjoy the peace of the garden." She nodded, glancing back at the flowers. "I do. It's one of the few things that helps me feel grounded." Mark wasn't sure where to start. He had so many questions, but they all seemed too personal. Instead, he opted for something simpler. "Why did you really propose this marriage, Eleanor? I know the official reason, but what's the real reason?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Eleanor's expression shifted. She seemed to consider his words carefully before responding. "You've been wondering about that, haven't you?" Mark nodded. "I've been trying to understand, but I'm not sure I'm getting the full picture." Eleanor sighed softly, a look of weariness crossing her face. She sat, the pruning shears down on the stone bench beside her, and turned to face him more fully. "I was never one for relationships, Mark. I built my life around my career, my business, and in the process, I pushed everyone away. I've always been independent, and I thought that was enough. But as the years went by, I realized something. I didn't want to be alone anymore. I didn't need love in the way most people do, but I needed someone. Someone to share the last years of my life with. Someone to talk to, someone who would care, even if it was just a little bit." Mark was quiet, absorbing her words. For the first time, he saw a vulnerability in her that he hadn't noticed before. "I understand," he said softly. "But why me? Why a stranger?" Eleanor gave him a rueful smile. "Because you were someone who had nothing left to lose. You were desperate, and I thought you might be willing to accept my offer because you needed it. I didn't expect it to turn into anything else, but I hoped that we might find some kind of connection." Mark felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had always assumed that Eleanor had simply seen him as a means to an end, but now he understood that she had her own reasons, her own fears, and her own loneliness. "I didn't know you felt that way," he admitted. "I thought it was all just about the money and the contract." Eleanor's eyes softened. "It's not just about that, Mark. It never was." For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Mark felt a shift in the air. Something between them had changed. The distance that had separated them, the coldness, seemed to evaporate, and for the first time since they had been married, Mark felt like they were two people who could actually understand each other. But just as the conversation began to feel more personal, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the moment. Eleanor's smile faded, and she stood up abruptly, brushing the dirt off her hands. "We'll talk more later," she said, her tone returning to its usual calm, businesslike nature. Mark watched her walk back toward the house, his heart still racing from their conversation. He had learned more about her in those few minutes than he had in the entire week they had been married. But he also knew that there was still so much more to discover. Little did he know, the next few days would reveal even more secrets, and the journey ahead would change both of their lives in ways they never expected. The days that followed Mark's conversation with Eleanor seemed to carry a sense of unease. While the air between them was no longer as heavy with silence, there was still an undeniable distance between them, one that neither of them seemed able to bridge. Mark tried to immerse himself in the life that he was now living, but something felt off. Every time he tried to talk to Eleanor, there was a coldness that he couldn't quite shake. Eleanor had opened up to him in a way that he didn't expect, and yet, he was still left wondering about the true nature of their marriage. Was she just lonely, or was there something more to her story? Eleanor had her own past, one that Mark was slowly beginning to uncover. One afternoon, Mark overheard a conversation between Eleanor and her lawyer, a conversation that would change everything he thought he knew. As he walked past her study, he heard her voice, an edge of frustration in her tone. "I don't want him to know just yet. He's not ready," Eleanor said. "But I can't keep this secret forever. You know what's at stake here." Mark stood frozen outside the door, his heart racing. He didn't know what she was talking about, but whatever it was, it sounded important. He waited until he heard the sound of footsteps leaving the room, then slowly pushed the door open. Eleanor was standing by the window, her back turned to him. She didn't notice him enter. "What's going on, Eleanor?" Mark asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. Eleanor turned around, her face softening when she saw him. "Nothing you need to worry about," she replied, though her voice held a hint of sadness. Mark wasn't convinced. "What were you talking about with your lawyer?" he pressed. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Eleanor sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. "It's complicated, Mark," she said quietly. "I never wanted to bring this into our lives, but I think it's time you knew." Mark stepped closer, his gaze intense. "Tell me," he said, his voice gentle, but firm. Eleanor hesitated for a moment before she spoke. "When I asked you to marry me, it wasn't just because I was lonely. It was because I needed someone to help me secure my legacy. My business is worth millions, and I have no heirs to pass it on to. I made a decision years ago to protect it, but now I realize I've been so focused on that, I've forgotten what it means to actually care for someone." Mark listened carefully, absorbing her words. "What do you mean by secure your legacy?" he asked. Eleanor looked at him, her expression hardening for a moment. "I have a son," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "His name is Nathan. He's my only child, but he's been estranged from me for years. He doesn't want anything to do with me, and I've never been able to get him to understand why I did what I did." Mark felt his stomach twist. "You have a son?" Eleanor nodded, her face drawn with regret. "Yes, I do. But he's not the man he used to be. The man I raised, he's gone. All that's left is someone who only cares about money, power, and control. I wanted to protect what I built, but I didn't know how to do it without pushing everyone away." Mark's mind was reeling. This was the part of Eleanor's life he had never known about, the part that made her the woman she was. "And you think I can help you with this?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Eleanor looked at him with a mixture of vulnerability and resolve. "Yes," she said softly. "I need you to stand by me, Mark. I need someone who will help me fight for what I've worked so hard to build. And I need someone who can stand up to Nathan when the time comes." Mark was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had just revealed. He had never expected this. When he agreed to marry Eleanor, it was for financial security, a way out of his own struggles. But now, he was being asked to take on something much bigger. The weight of the responsibility was overwhelming. "I don't know if I can do this," Mark said honestly. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I don't even know how to handle someone like Nathan." Eleanor's eyes softened, and she stepped closer to him. "You may not have all the answers, Mark, but you have something I've never had. Someone who is willing to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. That's why I chose you." Mark didn't know what to say. He was still trying to make sense of it all. Eleanor had trusted him with something so personal, something that could change the course of her entire life. And now, he had to decide if he was willing to help her, despite the fear and uncertainty swirling inside him. The next few days were filled with tension. Mark couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he had with Eleanor. He felt the pressure mounting, knowing that if he agreed to help her, it would change everything. He was no longer just a husband in a contract. He was now a key player in a much larger game. As the days passed, the tension between Mark and Nathan, Eleanor's estranged son, grew. Nathan had returned to the family estate after hearing about the marriage, and he wasted no time making it clear that he did not approve of Mark's involvement in the family business. The first time Mark met Nathan, it was at a family dinner. Nathan was cold, distant, and full of disdain for Mark. "You're just a pawn in my mother's game," Nathan sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you're going to get something out of this marriage? You're wrong." Mark met Nathan's gaze, his resolve hardening. "I'm not here for money, Nathan," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here because your mother needs help, and I'm willing to give it to her." Nathan laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You really think you're going to save her from me?" he challenged. "You don't know what you're getting into." Mark didn't respond. He knew that whatever happened next, he was in for a fight. But he also knew that he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when Eleanor was depending on him. The tension in the house was palpable. Mark had barely gotten through the first night of his confrontation with Nathan when he realized how deep the family divide went. Eleanor, despite her attempts to shield him, couldn't protect him from the coldness and hostility that seemed to come with the wealth and power she had built. Nathan's return was the spark that ignited a series of challenges, ones Mark wasn't sure he was ready for. The family dinners, once silent and awkward, became a battleground where words were sharper than knives. Nathan had made it clear from the start that he was not going to let Mark stand in his way. And Eleanor, though resolute in her decision to involve Mark, found herself torn between her duty to her son and her desire to finally find peace. One evening, as Mark and Eleanor sat in the grand dining room, the door opened abruptly. Nathan walked in, his expression one of defiance. "We need to talk," he said, his tone flat. Eleanor didn't even look up from her plate. "I'm not in the mood for your games, Nathan," she replied coolly. But Nathan wasn't backing down. "This isn't a game, Mother," he shot back, his eyes narrowing. "I'm tired of you using your wealth to manipulate people into doing your bidding. And I'm tired of seeing this charade." Mark could feel the heat rising in the room. He was about to say something, but Eleanor silenced him with a glance. "Nathan," she began, her voice calm but firm. "This has nothing to do with manipulation. Mark is here because I asked him to be. He's helping me with something important, and you need to accept that." Nathan laughed bitterly. "Helping you? Or helping yourself? You know you're too old to keep playing these games, don't you?" The words stung, but Eleanor didn't flinch. "You don't understand, Nathan. I've spent my life building something, and now I need someone to help me protect it." Mark, feeling the weight of the conversation, finally spoke up. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Nathan. I'm not trying to ruin your life or your inheritance. But your mother needs someone by her side, and I'm here for that." Nathan shot him a cold look. "You think she needs you? You're just a pawn in her plan, just like the rest of us." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, Mark saw the strength in her that he hadn't noticed before. "Enough," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "This is my decision, Nathan. I don't need you to approve of it, but I do need you to respect it." The silence in the room was thick, the air heavy with unresolved tension. Nathan turned to leave, his eyes still burning with anger. "You'll regret this, Mother," he said over his shoulder before slamming the door behind him. Eleanor sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. Mark could see the exhaustion in her face, the toll this conflict was taking on her. He wanted to say something comforting, but he wasn't sure what could ease the pain she was carrying. Instead, he simply reached across the table and took her hand. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. Eleanor gave him a small, grateful smile. "I know we will," she replied softly. But even as she spoke the words, Mark could see the doubt in her eyes. Later that evening, as Mark was in his room trying to unwind, his mind kept replaying Nathan's words. He wasn't just a pawn in Eleanor's game, was he? He was starting to wonder if this whole situation had been more complicated than he first realized. He wasn't just fighting for Eleanor's legacy. He was fighting for a place in a family that clearly didn't want him there. And as much as he wanted to help her, he was beginning to realize that it wasn't going to be as simple as he had hoped. The next day, Mark received a call from a lawyer representing Eleanor's business. The man introduced himself as Mr. Caldwell and asked to meet with Mark about the future of the company. Mark agreed, though he felt a sense of unease. What did the lawyer want? And what was Eleanor not telling him? When Mark arrived at the meeting, Mr. Caldwell was sitting at a large, polished oak desk. He looked the part of a corporate lawyer, well-dressed, sharp, and calculated. "Mr. Davis," he said, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Mark shook his hand, his stomach churning. "Likewise," he said, taking a seat. "What's this about?" Caldwell smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been asked to brief you on the current state of the company. There are some important matters to discuss, financial matters, specifically." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of financial matters?" Caldwell's expression turned serious. "You see, Mr. Davis, the company has been in some trouble for a while now. Eleanor has managed to keep it afloat, but there are some debts that need to be addressed. Without her full attention, the company could go under. She's entrusted you with helping her secure its future." Mark felt the weight of Caldwell's words settle in. He had known Eleanor's company was valuable, but he hadn't realized how fragile it really was. This wasn't just about legacy anymore. It was about survival. "What exactly do you need from me?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Caldwell leaned forward. "Your role in all of this is simple. You need to convince Eleanor to step back from her business decisions and allow us to take over the financial matters. She's been too personally involved, and it's clouding her judgment. Mark felt his blood run cold. You want me to push her out of her own company? Caldwell nodded. Not permanently, of course. But she needs to hand over the reins to someone with a clearer head. Someone who can make the tough decisions. Mark could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had come into this marriage to help Eleanor, to stand by her side. But now, it seemed like the very people she trusted were asking him to betray her. He was faced with a decision. Betray Eleanor to secure her company's future, or stand by her and risk losing everything. Mark's mind raced as he left the lawyer's office. The road ahead was getting much more complicated than he had ever anticipated. Mark couldn't stop replaying the conversation with Mr. Caldwell as he walked back to the mansion. His mind was spinning, filled with the heavy weight of the decision he now faced. He had always thought that by marrying Eleanor, he was offering his help in a way that was mutually beneficial. But now, it felt like he was being pushed into a corner. The very people Eleanor trusted were trying to manipulate her, and he was being asked to help them. His loyalty to her was being tested in a way he hadn't anticipated. As he entered the grand foyer of the house, the familiar emptiness of the place greeted him. It had been a few days since the last confrontation with Nathan, and Eleanor had retreated into herself, her presence even more distant than before. She had withdrawn to her private study, a room he hadn't ventured into much since moving in. The door was slightly ajar, and Mark hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, Eleanor was sitting at her desk, her back to him as she reviewed some documents. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, and she didn't notice him at first. Mark stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of what to say. The tension between them had been growing, and he didn't know if this was the right time to bring up the conversation with Caldwell. But he couldn't keep it inside any longer. "Eleanor," he said softly. She looked up, startled, before her gaze softened upon seeing him. "Mark, I didn't hear you come in." She gestured for him to sit. "What's on your mind?" Mark took a deep breath and walked into the room, his footsteps heavy. "I met with Mr. Caldwell today," he said, his voice steady but filled with concern. Eleanor's expression shifted, a flicker of something crossing her face, but she quickly masked it with her usual calm demeanor. "And?" she asked, as though she were bracing for something she already knew was coming. Mark sat down across from her. "He told me about the company's situation," he began. "He said there are financial troubles, and that you're too emotionally involved to make the tough decisions. He wants you to step back and let them take control of the business." Eleanor's face remained neutral, but Mark could see the strain in her eyes. She didn't respond right away. "Did he offer you any alternatives?" she asked, her voice low. Mark hesitated. "He wants me to help him convince you to step aside, Eleanor. He's asking me to help push you out of the company." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time since they had married, Mark saw Eleanor falter. She stared at the desk in front of her, her fingers tapping the surface absent-mindedly. Mark could feel the weight of the moment. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't want to betray you, but I also don't want to see you lose everything you've worked for." Eleanor finally looked up, meeting his gaze. "You don't have to choose between me and the company, Mark," she said quietly. "You know that, don't you?" Mark swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "But it feels like I'm being asked to choose, and I don't know what the right thing to do is." Eleanor stood up from her chair and walked over to the window, her back turned to him as she gazed out at the sprawling estate. The silence between them was thick, and Mark could feel the tension in his chest. "The company is everything to me, Mark," Eleanor said after a long pause. "It's all I've ever had. I built it from nothing. But it's also cost me everything. The people I loved, the family I once had, and now, I'm losing the one person I thought I could trust." Mark stood and walked over to her, unsure of what to say. He could see the exhaustion in her posture, the weight of years of sacrifice and loneliness. "I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor," he said softly. "I'm here for you. I won't let anyone push you out of your own life, not even them." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. "I don't want to lose you too," she whispered. Mark felt his heart tighten. He hadn't expected this kind of emotional revelation from her, but as she stood there, vulnerable and fragile, he realized how much she truly needed him. "You won't lose me," he said, his voice filled with determination. "But we can't do this alone. We need to make sure that the company's future is secure, that your legacy is protected." Eleanor nodded, her eyes filled with tears she hadn't let fall before. She wiped them away quickly, her pride holding her back from showing more emotion. "You're right," she said quietly. "But I won't just hand it over to them. Not without a fight." Mark smiled softly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Then we fight together." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their shared decision hanging in the air. Mark knew that their battle had just begun. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings and strategies. Mark worked closely with Caldwell, but he made sure Eleanor was never left out of the loop. They began to formulate a plan to regain control of the company, to show the board that Eleanor was still capable of running the business. But it wasn't just the company at stake now. Their marriage, their trust in each other, was at risk as well. Nathan, sensing that his mother and Mark were not going to back down, began to escalate his attacks. He spread rumors to the press, attempting to discredit both Eleanor and Mark. He played dirty, using his connections to try to turn public opinion against them. But Mark refused to let Nathan's tactics shake him. "We can't let him win," Mark told Eleanor one evening after a particularly brutal round of accusations from Nathan. "We have to stay strong." Eleanor, looking older than her years, nodded. "I know. I'm just so tired, Mark. Tired of fighting for everything, only to have it taken away." Mark took her hand in his resolve firm. "You're not fighting alone anymore, Eleanor. We're in this together, and we will win." The tension was far from over, but Mark knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter that would test their limits, their loyalty, and their love. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let Eleanor fight alone, and together, they would take on whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with tension, each moment dragging as Mark and Eleanor fought to regain control of the company. Mark had never imagined that a marriage born out of necessity would become a battlefield of corporate warfare and family betrayal. But as they moved forward, he realized that Eleanor wasn't just fighting for the company anymore. She was fighting for her place in the world, for the right to be respected and valued after years of sacrifice. They began their strategy with small steps, gathering the support of the board members who still believed in Eleanor's vision. Mark worked tirelessly with Caldwell, using his legal and business knowledge to formulate a plan that would put them back in the driver's seat. But Nathan wasn't making it easy. He had his own allies in the boardroom, and his manipulative tactics were far from subtle. He used every opportunity to discredit Mark and Eleanor, spreading rumors about their incompetence and undermining their credibility at every turn. But as the pressure mounted, Mark began to notice something different in Eleanor. For the first time, he saw her genuinely fighting back, not just in the boardroom, but in their personal lives as well. She had stopped shrinking away from Nathan's jabs and had started taking control of her own destiny. One evening, as they were preparing for a crucial meeting with the board, Eleanor turned to Mark and said, "You know, I've spent so much of my life trying to protect this company and my legacy that I forgot to live. I forgot to take chances, to trust people, to trust myself." Mark reached out, gently taking her hand. "You've always been strong, Eleanor. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. We've got this." She smiled at him, a smile that was genuine, full of warmth and trust. It was the first time in weeks that Mark felt like they were truly a team. The meeting the next day was critical. The board was divided, and Nathan was doing everything he could to sway opinions in his favor. Mark and Eleanor had a few supporters, but they needed more if they were going to secure their future. As the meeting progressed, it was clear that Nathan was not going to back down without a fight. He launched into a tirade about Eleanor's inability to manage the company and questioned Mark's qualifications. "How can we trust someone like him to run this business?" Nathan sneered. "He's just a stranger, a man with no experience." Mark could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he kept his composure. "I may not have your experience, Nathan," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm here because I believe in what Eleanor built. I believe in her vision, and I'm willing to fight for it." Eleanor stood up beside him, her back straight, her voice unwavering. "This company was never just about numbers and profits," she said, her gaze locked on the board members. "It was about creating something that would make a difference, something that would last long after I'm gone. And if you're going to tear that down because of personal grudges, then you're not the people I want to work with." The room fell silent. For a brief moment, Mark thought they might have lost the fight. But then one of the board members, a woman named Carol who had been quietly observing, spoke up. I've been on this board for over 30 years, she said, her voice firm. And I've seen companies rise and fall. But what Eleanor built here isn't just a company. It's a legacy. And we shouldn't let personal animosities destroy that. The tide was turning. Slowly but surely, the room began to shift in their favor. Nathan's supporters were fewer than he had hoped, and Eleanor's leadership was starting to shine through once again. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear that they had won. Nathan stormed out of the room, his face red with anger, but Eleanor remained calm, her eyes focused ahead. Mark couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as he watched her. This was a woman who had built an empire from the ground up, and now, she had proven that she still had the strength to protect it. Later that evening, after the dust had settled, Eleanor and Mark stood together on the balcony overlooking the estate. The air was cool, the sky clear, and for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of peace between them. We did it, Mark said quietly, his arm around her shoulders. Eleanor leaned into him, her head resting on his chest. We did, she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. Mark smiled, squeezing her gently. We're in this together. The battle was far from over, but Mark knew one thing for sure. Eleanor was no longer alone. And no matter what Nathan or anyone else tried, they would face the future together, stronger than ever. The days ahead would bring new challenges, but Mark was ready. He had come into this marriage thinking he was just a man with debts to pay, but now, he was a partner in something much greater. And as the sun set on the horizon, he realized that he had found something more important than wealth or status. He had found purpose, and he had found Eleanor. The victory in the boardroom was a hard-won one, but it was only the beginning of the battle. Mark could feel the weight of the responsibility growing heavier with each passing day. The success of their plan to regain control of the company felt like a fleeting triumph when compared to the ongoing tension with Nathan. He had not backed down, and now the fight was personal. Eleanor, on the other hand, was a woman transformed. The corporate battle had reignited something inside her, a spark that she hadn't realized had been dimming for years. She was no longer the woman who had been pushed around, the woman who had quietly accepted her fate. She was a woman determined to reclaim her life, not just her company, but her voice, her choices. But as the weeks went by, Mark began to notice that Eleanor wasn't the only one being tested. He, too, was changing. The man who had married Eleanor for security and a way out of his crushing debts was now finding himself inextricably linked to her world, her struggles, and her past. The walls that had once separated them were beginning to crumble. Their marriage, born out of practicality, was turning into something else. Mark found himself caring more and more about Eleanor's well-being, not just her business. He had begun to see her not as the powerful businesswoman who had hired him, but as the vulnerable woman who had spent her life sacrificing for her dreams. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and negotiations, Mark found himself sitting across from Eleanor in the quiet of their dining room. The house was eerily still, the grandeur of the estate almost oppressive in its silence. Eleanor had just returned from yet another confrontation with Nathan, and though she was trying to hide it, Mark could see how worn she was. She looked tired, as though the weight of everything was finally taking its toll. He didn't know what to say. He had been so focused on the business side of things, trying to protect Eleanor's legacy, that he hadn't really stopped to ask how she was holding up. Eleanor, he began softly, how are you really doing? She glanced at him, surprised by the question. She had become so accustomed to being the one who bore the weight of everything, the one who protected everyone, that she wasn't used to someone asking about her. I'm fine, she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. You don't have to do this alone, you know, Mark said, his voice low and sincere. I know we've been focusing on the company and getting everything back on track, but I see how much it's wearing you down. I'm here, for you, not just for the business. Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a moment, she seemed to hesitate. Then, with a small sigh, she put down her glass of wine and met his gaze. I'm not used to letting people in, Mark, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. For so long, I've had to do everything myself. I've built this empire, but it's cost me a lot. And now, I feel like I'm losing control of everything. Mark's heart ached for her. He could see the raw vulnerability behind her words, the cracks in her armor that she had spent so many years carefully constructing. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. You're not losing control, Eleanor. You're just learning to trust someone else with it. I'm here to help, and I'll stay by your side no matter what. Eleanor looked down at their intertwined hands, a small, bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. I don't know if I can trust anyone else with this, she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly. It's everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed. Mark squeezed her hand, his voice firm. You've already trusted me with your legacy, Eleanor, and I won't let you down. But you don't have to do this alone. The words hung between them, unspoken promises of partnership and loyalty. In that moment, Eleanor realized that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong all these years. Maybe it wasn't just about the company. Maybe it was about the people who cared enough to fight alongside her, to rebuild what had been broken, and to heal what had been lost. Over the next few days, Mark and Eleanor spent more time together, not just in meetings, but in quiet conversations, talking about the future, about what they wanted, and what they feared. It wasn't easy for Eleanor to let her guard down, but she was trying. She had spent so much of her life building walls around herself, walls that had kept her safe, but had also kept her from truly connecting with anyone. Now, with Mark by her side, she was learning to tear those walls down, one brick at a time. Meanwhile, Nathan was becoming more unpredictable. After his defeat in the boardroom, he had turned to other methods to try and undermine Eleanor and Mark. He spread false rumors, leaked private information to the press, and used every dirty tactic in his arsenal to make their lives miserable. But no matter what Nathan did, Mark and Eleanor stayed strong. They had come to realize that the only way to defeat him was to remain united, to keep their focus on what really mattered. One evening, as they were sitting together, going over the final details of a new business deal, Eleanor turned to Mark with a thoughtful expression. You've been a lot more than I ever expected, Mark, she said, her tone sincere. I never thought that when I asked you to marry me, it would turn into this. But now, I can't imagine doing any of this without you. Mark looked at her, a soft smile on his face. I never expected it either, he admitted. But I've come to realize that it's not just about the business or the money. It's about us, what we're building together. Eleanor's eyes shone with something more than just gratitude. It was something deeper, something she had been searching for all along. And in that moment, Mark knew that despite all the challenges they had faced, they had found something real, something worth fighting for. The next few weeks would bring even more trials, more battles with Nathan, more tough decisions for the company. But Mark and Eleanor were ready. Together, they were unstoppable. And no matter how hard Nathan tried, they knew they had already won something far more important than any business deal. They had found trust, respect, and a bond that was stronger than anything else. The weeks that followed brought new challenges, but they also brought a new sense of unity between Mark and Eleanor. Their shared fight to reclaim control of the company had not only solidified their professional bond, but it had also begun to shape their personal relationship in ways neither of them had expected. The trust they had built, the late nights spent strategizing, and the quiet moments of support had slowly turned the coldness of their marriage into something more, something real. But Nathan's tactics continued to escalate. He wasn't one to back down easily, and as he realized that his power over Eleanor was slipping away, he grew more ruthless. Rumors swirled, leaks continued, and he found new ways to challenge their every move. Yet despite the pressure, Mark and Eleanor remained focused. They had been through worse and had come out stronger, and now, more than ever, they knew they had to stay the course. One afternoon, Eleanor received a phone call that would change everything. Mark had just returned from a meeting when he saw her standing by the window, her expression unreadable. She looked up as he entered, her face pale. What's wrong? Mark asked, instantly sensing something was off. Eleanor hung up the phone, her hand trembling slightly. It's Nathan, she said, her voice strained. He's filed a lawsuit against me, claiming I'm mentally unfit to run the company. He's using everything. My age, my decision to marry you, everything. Mark's stomach sank. This was the last thing they needed. He's going after your reputation, he said, his voice darkening with anger. He's trying to destroy everything you've worked for. Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon outside. He knows that if he can take me down, he can take control of everything. He's been planning this for a while. Mark stepped closer, putting his hand on her shoulder. We'll fight him, he said firmly. We won't let him win. But as they sat down to discuss their next move, Mark could see the fear in Eleanor's eyes. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about her life, her legacy, and everything she had sacrificed for the past few decades. Eleanor had always been a fighter, but even she was starting to feel the weight of the constant battle. The lawsuit was a turning point for them. It wasn't just a legal challenge, it was a personal one. Mark knew that the stakes were higher than ever. They couldn't afford to lose this battle, and they couldn't afford to let Nathan tear them apart. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly with their legal team, gathering evidence to fight back against Nathan's claims. They knew this wouldn't be easy. Nathan had been preparing for this moment for months, if not years. He had carefully orchestrated his attack, making sure that every move would strike at the heart of Eleanor's reputation. But Mark and Eleanor were not without their own resources. They knew the truth, and they were determined to expose Nathan for the manipulative person he truly was. As the trial date drew nearer, the pressure mounted. Mark could feel the tension in the house growing. Eleanor was becoming more withdrawn, lost in the details of the lawsuit. Mark knew that he had to be the one to keep her grounded, to remind her of everything they had already accomplished together. Eleanor, Mark said one evening as they sat in their study, you fought too hard for too long to let Nathan take it all away. This company, your legacy, it's yours. Don't let him take that from you. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She had grown to rely on Mark in ways she hadn't anticipated. His support, his unwavering belief in her, had become the anchor she needed. I don't know what I'd do without you, she said quietly. Mark took her hand, his voice steady. You don't have to worry about that. We're in this together. Whatever happens, we'll face it as a team. The night before the trial, Mark and Eleanor stood together on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against their faces. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, and they stood there, side by side, looking out at the city below. It was a rare moment of peace amidst the chaos of the past few weeks. Eleanor leaned against the railing, her eyes soft. I never imagined my life would turn out like this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I would build something, and then I'd be able to enjoy it. But instead, I've spent my life fighting. Fighting for respect, fighting for success, fighting for control. Mark stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her back. You've built something incredible, Eleanor. Don't forget that. No one can take that away from you. She smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the distant skyline. Maybe you're right, she said softly. Maybe it's time I stopped fighting just to survive and started fighting for what I really want. Mark's heart swelled with pride. He had seen Eleanor grow from the woman who had locked herself away behind walls of business and power into someone who was willing to embrace vulnerability, to trust. And as they prepared for the trial the next day, Mark knew that whatever the outcome, they had already won something far more valuable than any legal victory. They had found each other. The trial was grueling. Nathan pulled out every tactic he had, trying to discredit Eleanor, painting her as mentally unstable and unable to run the company. But Mark and Eleanor held their ground, presenting their case with the truth. The legal team fought back fiercely, presenting evidence that showed Nathan's manipulation, his desire for control, and his willingness to go to any lengths to destroy Eleanor. It was a long, exhausting battle, but in the end, the judge ruled in their favor. Eleanor's reputation was cleared, and Nathan's claims were dismissed. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and disbelief, but as Eleanor and Mark walked out together, hand in hand, they knew the fight wasn't over. Nathan would keep coming, but so would they, and no matter what, they would face it together. The ruling had been a victory, but Mark and Eleanor knew it was only a temporary one. Nathan's defeat in court didn't mean he was finished. It only fueled his desire for revenge. The legal battle had taken a toll on both of them, but in the aftermath, they felt a brief sense of relief. The weight of the lawsuit was gone, but the battle was far from over. Eleanor had her name cleared, but Nathan's influence was still a powerful force to reckon with, and the company was not yet out of danger. The days that followed were filled with both relief and uncertainty. Mark could see the strain in Eleanor's face. She had always been strong, but now, even with the court's decision in their favor, it was as though a part of her had been broken. She had spent so much of her life guarding her heart, keeping people at arm's length, that the emotional toll of the past weeks had started to catch up with her. Mark, ever vigilant, tried to keep the focus on the future, but he could see the cracks in her armor. She wasn't the woman she once was. Eleanor had spent decades building a business, but now she had to rebuild herself. She had trusted people before, only to have them turn on her, and now, even though they had won in court, she wasn't sure who to trust anymore. The one person she had come to trust fully was Mark, and that realization hit her harder than anything else. She had opened her heart to him in a way she never thought possible. He had become not just her business partner, but her partner in life. But with Nathan's continued attacks, Eleanor was struggling to keep her focus. She was scared, and she didn't want to show it. Mark could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped a little lower each day, and he knew that they needed to take a step back. "Eleanor," he said gently one evening, "maybe we need to take a break from all of this. Just for a little while. We can deal with Nathan later. Let's focus on you for once." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes tired but grateful. She had never been one to take a step back. She had always been the one who worked relentlessly, who sacrificed everything for the business. But now, looking into Mark's eyes, she realized he was right. She had neglected herself for far too long. They decided to take a weekend away, far from the tension of the city and the constant pressure of the business. It was a simple trip to a small cabin by the lake, a place where they could both breathe and reconnect. The moment they arrived, Eleanor felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen. The fresh air, the sound of the water lapping against the shore, and the quiet serenity of the place were a stark contrast to the whirlwind of their lives back home. They spent the weekend walking through the woods, sitting by the lake, and just talking. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt like she could truly relax. Mark was there beside her, not as her partner in business, but as someone who cared for her deeply. The connection between them, which had started with a business arrangement, had evolved into something neither of them had expected. They weren't just fighting for a company anymore. They were fighting for each other. On their final evening at the cabin, as the sun began to set, Eleanor sat on the porch with Mark, her hand resting in his. The air was cool, but the warmth of their shared time together made it feel like everything was falling into place. "I never thought I'd be here," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I never thought I'd trust anyone enough to let them in, to let them see the parts of me that I've kept hidden for so long." Mark squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "You don't have to do it alone anymore, Eleanor. You've got me, and we're in this together, no matter what." She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with something new. Hope, perhaps, or even peace. It was a look he hadn't seen in her before, a look that spoke of vulnerability, of someone who had come to terms with the past and was now ready to face the future. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice cracking with emotion. "For everything." Mark smiled, his heart swelling with affection for the woman who had become his partner, not just in business, but in life. "I'll always be here for you," he said simply. The weekend away had given them both the space they needed to clear their minds, to reset. When they returned home, they were ready to face the next battle. Nathan would continue to be a thorn in their side, but they were no longer the same people they had been before. They had come together in ways neither of them had expected. Their marriage was no longer just a business arrangement. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and, perhaps for the first time in Eleanor's life, love. Mark knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Nathan's attacks were relentless, and the company still faced serious challenges. But now, Mark and Eleanor had each other. They had found something far more valuable than money or power. They had found a reason to fight, a reason to keep moving forward. And as they walked into the next phase of their journey, side by side, they knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. The time that followed their weekend getaway was filled with a new sense of purpose. Mark and Eleanor were more united than ever, their bond strengthened by the challenges they had faced and the quiet moments they had shared. They returned to the city with a renewed sense of determination, ready to tackle whatever obstacles lay ahead. Nathan had not given up, but neither had they. They had proven that they could handle his attacks and come out victorious, but they both knew that the war was far from over. Eleanor had always been a fighter, but now, with Mark by her side, she was ready to fight harder than ever for what she had built. As they settled back into their routine, Eleanor started taking more control of the company again, making bold decisions that set the company on a new path. The board members who had once doubted her leadership now saw her in a new light. She was no longer the woman who had been hesitant to trust, to open up. She was the woman who had reclaimed her power, and they respected her for it. Mark, too, found himself becoming more involved in the company, but not just in the business side of things. He was becoming her partner in every sense of the word. They shared ideas, debated strategies, and built a future together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of tension, moments when their personal and professional lives collided. But they always came back to each other, always worked through their differences with respect and understanding. The company wasn't the only thing they were building. Their relationship was growing stronger, too. They were learning to navigate the complexities of their marriage, finding a balance between their roles as business partners and as people who genuinely cared for one another. One evening, as they were finishing up a meeting at the office, Eleanor turned to Mark with a thoughtful look. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. Mark smiled, leaning back in his chair. "We have. I never imagined it would turn out like this. I thought I was just here to help you with the business. But this feels like something much bigger." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "I know I've been difficult at times," she said, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "But you've never given up on me. Not when it was easy, and not when it was hard." Mark reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. I'm here for you, not just for the business, but for us. We're in this together." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a moment, she let herself believe in the possibility of a future that wasn't just defined by her past. "Thank you, Mark. You've given me more than I ever thought possible. Not just in the company, but in life. I never expected to find someone like you." Mark smiled, his heart full. "I didn't expect to find someone like you, either. You've taught me more than you know. About strength, about resilience, about love." They stood there for a moment, holding each other's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. They had both changed over the past few months, had both grown in ways they hadn't anticipated. But through it all, they had found something real, something worth fighting for. The next day, Eleanor received a call that would shift the balance of everything. Nathan had made his next move, but this time, it wasn't in the form of another legal attack. Instead, he had reached out with an offer, a deal. He was willing to withdraw his claims, to step back from the company, but only if Eleanor agreed to a buyout, to sell him her shares. The offer was generous, tempting even, but Eleanor knew it wasn't just about money. It was about power. It was about control. Mark could see the conflict in her eyes when she told him about the offer. "He thinks he can buy me out, Mark," Eleanor said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "He thinks I'll just give up and walk away." Mark took a deep breath. "And what do you want to do?" he asked gently. Eleanor was silent for a moment, weighing the decision. "I've built this company from nothing. I've fought for it, sacrificed for it. I'm not going to just give it up, not to him, not to anyone." Mark nodded, his gaze firm. "Then we fight. We don't let him win. Not this time." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with determination. "No, not this time." They knew this was another turning point. Nathan had underestimated them, but they weren't going to let him dictate their future. They had fought too hard, too long, and they weren't about to stop now. The next few weeks were filled with intense negotiations, strategy sessions, and long nights spent planning their next move. But as they moved forward, Eleanor's confidence grew. She knew what she was fighting for, and she was no longer afraid to stand up for it. As the final negotiation approached, Mark stood by her side, just as he had from the beginning. He wasn't just her partner in business. He was her partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had built something stronger than either of them could have done alone. And as the stakes grew higher, they knew they had one thing Nathan could never take from them: their commitment to each other. On the day of the final deal, Mark and Eleanor stood together in the conference room, ready to face whatever came next. Nathan walked in, his usual smug expression on his face, but this time, he didn't have the upper hand. Eleanor, calm and collected, looked him in the eye. "You've underestimated me, Nathan," she said, her voice steady. "This company is mine and I won't let you destroy it." Nathan's smile faltered for the first time. He realized, perhaps too late, that the game had changed. Eleanor and Mark weren't the ones who were backing down. They were the ones who were about to win. The negotiation was tough, but in the end, Eleanor and Mark walked out of the room victorious. Nathan had been outsmarted, outplayed, and for the first time, he understood that he could never truly control Eleanor. She had finally reclaimed what was rightfully hers. As Mark and Eleanor left the conference room together, hand in hand, they both knew that this victory was more than just about business. It was about proving to themselves and to the world that they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. The days following their victory in the negotiation were filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment, but Mark and Eleanor knew better than to let their guard down. Nathan, despite his defeat, was still a formidable opponent. The victory had been hard-earned, but it had come at a price. The stress and pressure of the past months had taken their toll, and while they were both relieved, they knew there was still much to be done. The company was still in the midst of a major restructuring, and Eleanor's trust in the people around her had been shaken. She was no longer the same woman who had stepped into the business world decades ago, confident and isolated in her decisions. Now, she was more cautious, more aware of the people who might betray her. But with Mark by her side, she found herself starting to believe in her own strength again. They had won the battle against Nathan, but there was a new enemy to face: doubt. Eleanor was starting to wonder if she could truly trust the people in her inner circle. She had fought so hard to build the company, but now she was questioning whether the people who had once been her allies were as loyal as they seemed. As the weeks passed, Eleanor and Mark worked together to secure the company's future. They hired new staff, restructured departments, and brought in fresh perspectives to replace those who had shown signs of disloyalty. But it wasn't just the company that needed restructuring. Eleanor needed to rebuild her life as well. She had spent so much time focusing on the business that she had neglected the people who truly mattered. She had pushed away friends, family, and even herself in the pursuit of success. Now, with Mark by her side, she was beginning to understand that there was more to life than just business. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Eleanor sat down at her desk, looking at the stacks of paperwork in front of her. She had accomplished so much, but it still didn't feel like enough. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Mark, who had been working beside her, looked up from his own paperwork and noticed the weariness in her eyes. "Eleanor," he said gently, "you've done enough. More than enough. You don't have to carry all of this alone." Eleanor looked up at him, her expression softening. "I know. It's just, I don't know how to stop. I've spent my entire life building this, and now that it's almost stable again, I feel like I can't breathe. I don't know what to do with myself." Mark stood up and walked over to her, sitting beside her. "It's okay to let go," he said quietly. "You've spent so much time taking care of everything and everyone else. You don't have to carry all of this on your shoulders anymore. You've got people around you who care, people who are here to help, and most importantly, you've got me." Eleanor's eyes welled up with emotion, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to show her vulnerability. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've been my strength when I didn't know if I could keep going. I don't know how to thank you." Mark took her hand, his voice firm but gentle. "You don't have to thank me, Eleanor. We're in this together. We've been through too much to turn back now." The next day, Eleanor made a decision. She would begin to delegate more, to trust the people she had brought in to help her run the company. It wasn't easy, but she knew it was time to stop trying to control every detail. She had spent so many years working in isolation, holding everything together herself, that now, she needed to learn how to trust others. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor slowly started to step back, allowing her team to take the reins while she focused on other aspects of her life. Mark was right beside her, supporting her every step of the way. They spent more time together outside of the office, exploring new interests, taking walks in the park, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was a side of life Eleanor had almost forgotten about, one that wasn't about work or success, but about connection and love. As they spent more time together, Eleanor realized just how much she had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this marriage, driven solely by ambition. She had learned to trust, to let go, and to rely on the people who cared about her. Mark had shown her that life wasn't just about building an empire. It was about the people who made that empire worth building. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the sunset, Eleanor turned to Mark with a smile. "I never imagined life could be like this," she said softly. "I've spent so much time focused on the future that I forgot to appreciate the present. But with you, I'm learning how to enjoy the moment." Mark smiled back, his eyes filled with warmth. "We've been through a lot, Eleanor, and we've come out stronger for it. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together." The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt at peace. She had found a balance between her business and her personal life, between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. Mark had been her anchor throughout it all, and now, she knew that together, they could face anything. They had weathered the storms, fought the battles, and emerged victorious. And no matter what came next, Eleanor knew that she had found something more valuable than anything money could buy: love, trust, and a future built on partnership. The peace that Eleanor had found in her life was beginning to feel like a new chapter, but as with every victory, there were still hurdles to face. Nathan's retreat from the company had not meant the end of his ambitions. He had begun to shift his attention away from direct conflict and instead turned his focus to subtle ways of undermining everything Eleanor and Mark had worked to build. His influence might have been diminished, but his reach was still far, and he knew how to play the long game. Mark could see the storm brewing. Eleanor was unaware, or perhaps hopeful that the worst was over. Her confidence had returned, but her trust was still fragile. She had learned to lean on Mark in ways she had never expected, but the scars from her past still lingered. He couldn't blame her. After years of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal, Eleanor had built her walls high, and it was only with time that they were slowly beginning to crumble. One afternoon, as they sat together in the office, reviewing quarterly reports, Mark noticed a shift in Eleanor's demeanor. She seemed distracted, her brow furrowed as she scanned through the numbers. Mark watched her for a moment, sensing that something was off. "Eleanor, what's going on?" he asked, leaning forward. She glanced up, her eyes dark with concern. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about Nathan's next move." Mark raised an eyebrow. "He's been quiet for a while. What do you think he's planning?" Eleanor sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm not sure, but I've learned not to underestimate him. I've been getting reports of strange meetings, people within the company still loyal to him, and some questionable activities on the outside." Mark could see that Eleanor was troubled. Despite all the victories they had secured, she couldn't shake the lingering fear of what Nathan might still do to get back at her. "We can't keep worrying about what he might do, Eleanor," Mark said, his voice firm but reassuring. "We've come this far because we've faced everything head-on. If he's planning something, we'll be ready for it. Together." Eleanor gave him a small, grateful smile, but the concern in her eyes remained. She had spent so much of her life running a company, fighting for survival, and now, in this fragile peace, she wasn't sure how to let her guard down completely. Mark understood that more than anyone. He had seen her battle to prove herself time and again, but now, it was time to learn how to trust again, not just in the company, but in people, in herself, and in their shared future. "I'm not going to let him take anything away from us," Eleanor said, her voice resolute. Mark nodded, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "And I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this. You don't have to do it alone." As the days passed, the two of them began to make plans to ensure that Nathan's reach was truly gone. They tightened the company's security, both online and in person, and continued to build stronger relationships with key stakeholders. Eleanor started to trust her team more, knowing that the loyalty they had shown her was real. Mark, too, became more involved, not just in the business side of things, but in ensuring that Eleanor had the support she needed on a personal level. The balance between business and personal life was still delicate, but they were managing it with greater ease. The company continued to flourish, and Eleanor's vision was beginning to take shape in ways that were more meaningful than just financial success. She had found a new purpose, one that involved mentoring others, particularly women in business, to help them build their own empires, just as she had done. She wanted her legacy to be more than just a company. It was about creating opportunities, inspiring others to rise above their circumstances and find their own path to success. But even with all the progress they had made, Eleanor couldn't escape the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows. Her instincts had been honed over the years, and she trusted them. So when an unexpected call came one evening, she felt a knot form in her stomach. It was from one of her most trusted associates, who had been monitoring Nathan's movements from afar. "Eleanor, I think it's time we had a conversation," the voice on the other end said, "about what Nathan's been planning." Eleanor's heart raced. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp with tension. "I've been tracking his assets," the associate continued, "and I found something that doesn't add up. It looks like Nathan's been secretly building a new company, using shell companies to siphon off resources and create a new network of investors. He's preparing to launch a new attack." Eleanor's grip tightened around the phone. She had known this moment would come, but she hadn't anticipated it would come this soon. "How serious is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "Serious," came the reply. "He's got a lot of backing this time, and if he pulls this off, he could be back in control before we even know what hit us." Eleanor stood up, her mind racing. She had fought too hard to lose everything now. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll take care of it." She hung up the phone, her mind already calculating the next steps. She turned to Mark, who had been listening silently from across the room. "Nathan's at it again," she said, her voice cold with determination. "He's building something, and we need to stop him before it's too late." Mark stood up, walking over to her. "We'll stop him, Eleanor. We've already been through so much together. He won't get the better of us now." Eleanor nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Let's take him down, once and for all." The next phase of their journey was beginning, and Eleanor knew that the stakes had never been higher. But she was ready. With Mark by her side, they had already faced the impossible and come out on top. Nathan wouldn't win. Not this time. Not when they were in it together. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Eleanor had just received the news about Nathan's new venture, and everything they had worked for felt as if it could unravel in an instant. But this time, there would be no waiting to see what happened. Mark could see the determination in her eyes as she hung up the phone, her mind already calculating their next steps. Nathan might have thought he had the upper hand, but Eleanor was far from defeated. "We can't wait around for him to make his move," Eleanor said, her voice steady, but Mark could hear the urgency beneath it. "We need to be proactive. He's got money, investors, and a plan, but we have something he doesn't, our integrity and our ability to move fast." Mark nodded. "Let's take him on directly. We know what he's doing now. We can disrupt his plan before he even gets the chance to launch it." Over the next few days, Eleanor and Mark worked tirelessly. They brought in their most trusted allies, people who had been loyal even when Nathan had tried to manipulate them, and started gathering intelligence. The more they uncovered, the more they realized the scale of Nathan's plan. He wasn't just targeting Eleanor's company anymore. He was building a new empire, one that could easily rival everything she had spent years building. He had already secured several high-profile investors, and he was gaining traction in the markets that Eleanor had once dominated. But Eleanor wasn't the type to back down in the face of a challenge. "This is personal now," she said one evening, as they reviewed the documents they had obtained. "Nathan is trying to take away everything I've worked for. He's trying to erase me from the equation." Mark could feel the weight of her words. It wasn't just about business anymore. Nathan's vendetta against Eleanor had gone too far. It was a direct attack on her legacy, her vision, and everything she had built from the ground up. "What do we do next?" Mark asked, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We hit him where it hurts," Eleanor replied. "We go after his investors, expose him for the fraud he is, and remind everyone that loyalty, integrity, and trust still matter in business." Mark watched her, admiring her resilience. Despite everything Nathan had thrown her way, Eleanor was standing tall, ready to fight again. They spent the following weeks organizing their counterattack. They reached out to key investors who had been approached by Nathan, explaining the risks and revealing the shady tactics he had been using. They used their network, their reputation, and their hard-earned trust to slowly chip away at Nathan's base of support. They also worked on creating a more robust public image for Eleanor's company, focusing on the values that Nathan was trying to tarnish. Values like loyalty, transparency, and innovation. It was a strategy that played to their strengths. Meanwhile, Nathan was growing increasingly frustrated. His plan wasn't going as smoothly as he had hoped. Investors were starting to question his motives, and the media attention they had garnered was starting to make him look like a desperate, vindictive businessman. But Nathan wasn't going to give up that easily. He made his next move by turning the public spotlight back onto Eleanor's company, launching a smear campaign aimed at discrediting her. He leaked false information about the financial health of her company, suggesting that it was on the verge of bankruptcy, hoping to create doubt in the minds of investors and customers alike. Mark and Eleanor had expected this. They had already prepared a response, crafting a message that would reassure their clients and investors about the stability of the company. They had already proven that they could weather the storm, and they would prove it again. But Nathan's latest attempt to tarnish Eleanor's reputation only fueled her resolve. She was no longer fighting just for the company. She was fighting for her integrity, her vision, and the legacy she had worked so hard to build. "We've been here before, Mark," Eleanor said one evening, as they sat together in her office, the city lights twinkling outside. "We've faced the impossible. We've won, and we'll win again." Mark smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. "We've come a long way, Eleanor, and we're not backing down now." They worked tirelessly, night after night, countering every false claim, repairing the damage Nathan had done, and ensuring that the truth about their company was heard. Their loyal customers, investors, and employees stood by them, and their support only grew stronger as they saw Eleanor's commitment to her values. The public image of Eleanor's company began to shift. Instead of being painted as a sinking ship, it was becoming known for its resilience, its commitment to ethical business practices, and its dedication to innovation. Eleanor had become a symbol of perseverance in a world that often favored ruthless tactics over integrity. The more they exposed Nathan's tactics, the more investors started to pull out of his deal. Slowly but surely, his empire began to crumble. He was losing the support he had worked so hard to build, and with each passing day, his grip on the business world weakened. Eleanor and Mark had fought back in a way that no one had expected. They had faced down Nathan's smears, his lies, and his threats, and they had done it with grace and strength. And in the end, they had not only saved the company, they had built something stronger than before. One evening, after another long day of work, Eleanor stood on the balcony of her office, looking out at the city. Mark stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We did it," she said softly, her voice filled with both relief and pride. "We stopped him." Mark smiled, his eyes warm with affection. "We stopped him together." For the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced down the storm, fought for what was hers, and come out stronger for it. And now, with Mark by her side, she knew they could face whatever the future held. Together, they had built something that no one could ever take from them: trust, loyalty, and a partnership that was stronger than anything they had ever known. The weeks following Nathan's defeat were quieter, but the battle wasn't over yet. Eleanor and Mark had worked hard to stabilize the company, but they knew there was still work to be done. Nathan's attempt to destroy everything Eleanor had built had only brought them closer together. It had solidified their bond and proven just how strong they were as a team. But now, with Nathan out of the picture, Eleanor faced a new challenge: her own sense of self-worth. For so long, her identity had been tied to the company, to the business she had built from the ground up. Now, with the immediate threats behind them, Eleanor was left to wonder what her future held beyond the walls of the company. She had never allowed herself the luxury of considering a life outside of work. It had always been about proving herself, achieving success, and keeping the empire intact. But now that the dust had settled, she couldn't ignore the feelings of emptiness that had crept into her life. Mark could see the struggle in her eyes. He had always admired her strength, her ambition, but he knew that the woman standing before him was more than just the CEO of a successful company. She was a person with dreams, hopes, and fears that went far beyond the office. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of her office, reviewing the company's progress, Eleanor looked up from the papers in front of her and sighed. "Mark, I don't know what comes next," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "For so long, I've been focused on the company, on the future of this business. But now that the dust has settled, I realize that I don't know who I am without it." Mark looked at her, his gaze filled with understanding. "Eleanor, you've been so focused on the company for years, and I get that. But you're more than just this business. You're someone with a life beyond all of this." Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know how to do that, Mark. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built, it's been my identity. And now, without that, I feel lost." Mark reached out and took her hand in his. "You're not lost, Eleanor. You've always been strong. You've just forgotten how to live for yourself, not just for the business. And that's okay. You've done amazing things, but now it's time to think about what makes you happy. You deserve to live a life that's not just about work." Eleanor looked down at their hands, her heart heavy with emotion. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "I've spent so many years pushing people away, keeping everything at arm's length. I don't know how to open up to the world, to anything outside of work." Mark smiled softly, his voice gentle. "You start by taking it one step at a time. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take a moment to breathe, to live, and to be present in the world outside of this office. I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." His words were like a lifeline. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a life that wasn't consumed by work, a life where she could enjoy the little things, take risks, and allow herself to be happy. The next few weeks were filled with small changes. Eleanor started to take more time for herself, taking breaks from the office, going on walks, and even taking up a few hobbies she had always put off. Mark was right by her side, supporting her every step of the way. They spent more time together outside of the office, enjoying the simple pleasures of life that had once been lost in the chaos of running a company. Slowly but surely, Eleanor began to rediscover who she was beyond the walls of her business. She realized that she had spent so much time fighting for success that she had forgotten to live, to enjoy the moments that truly mattered. She started to make time for her friends, reconnecting with people she had pushed aside in the past. Eleanor even started to explore new passions, ones that had nothing to do with business. She took up painting, something she had always wanted to do but had never had the time for. She started traveling, seeing new places, and experiencing life in ways she never had before. Mark was there with her, supporting her every step of the way, but never pushing her. He understood that this was Eleanor's journey, and he was happy to be by her side, watching her rediscover herself. One evening, as they sat together at the table in their home, Eleanor looked at Mark with a quiet smile. "I don't think I could have done this without you," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You've helped me realize that there's more to life than just business. You've shown me what it means to live fully, to take risks, and to enjoy the journey." Mark smiled back, his eyes warm with affection. "I'm just glad to be here, Eleanor. Watching you rediscover yourself, your passions, and your happiness has been amazing." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you, Mark. I'm not sure I would have ever taken the step to change if you hadn't been there to remind me that I deserve more than just success. I deserve to live, to love, and to be happy." Mark's heart swelled with pride, knowing that he had played a small part in helping Eleanor find her way. The journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, always obstacles to face. But now, Eleanor had a new sense of purpose, one that went beyond the boardroom. She had found herself again, and with Mark by her side, she knew that anything was possible. Together, they had weathered the storms and come out stronger. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a team, united, strong, and ready for whatever life had in store. As the months passed, Eleanor's life had begun to settle into a new rhythm. The weight of the past few years, the betrayals, the battles, and the uncertainty, had started to lift. She had taken time to rediscover herself, to find joy in the little things, and to rebuild the trust she had lost in herself. The company was thriving, not just financially, but in ways that felt more meaningful. It was no longer just about the bottom line. It was about the people, the team they had built, and the values they upheld. With Mark by her side, Eleanor was learning how to balance the demands of the business world with a fulfilling personal life. Together, they had crafted a future that felt sustainable, a life built on love, trust, and shared goals. Yet, despite all the progress, Eleanor knew that there was still unfinished business. The road they had traveled was not without its scars, and those scars, though healed, had left a mark on her heart. She had learned so much, not just about business, but about herself. And now, it was time to take that knowledge and use it to guide the company through the next chapter. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Eleanor sat on the balcony of her office, gazing out at the city. The world below her seemed so much quieter now. The hustle and bustle of the past years, the constant pressure to prove herself, had finally subsided. Yet, a quiet restlessness still lingered in her. She wasn't sure what the next step was, but she knew she wasn't done yet. Mark joined her, his presence a calm reassurance in the midst of her thoughts. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, sensing the uncertainty that still lingered. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice soft and steady. Eleanor turned to him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's just that, now that we've gotten through everything, I feel like there's something more I'm supposed to be doing. Like I'm meant to take this company to the next level, but I'm not sure what that looks like yet." Mark smiled, understanding her more than anyone. "You've already done so much, Eleanor. You've built something incredible. But I think you're right. There's more for you to give. And I'll be right here with you, no matter what you decide." Eleanor's heart swelled with gratitude. In that moment, she realized that the journey wasn't about a destination. It was about the people she shared it with, the connections they had built, and the legacy they were creating together. "Thank you, Mark," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've been my rock through all of this. I don't think I would have made it without you." Mark leaned in, kissing her forehead. "You're stronger than you know, Eleanor. I'm just glad I've had the privilege to stand beside you." It was in that moment that Eleanor realized what her next step would be. She didn't need to have all the answers right now. What mattered was that she had the freedom to create her own path, to continue to lead her company with integrity and vision. And perhaps, more importantly, to live her life in a way that honored the lessons she had learned along the way. The following months were filled with new ideas and possibilities. Eleanor began to look at the company through a different lens. She had always been focused on growth, on success, on winning, but now she was more interested in sustainability, in creating a company culture that was centered on people and values, not just profits. She started implementing new initiatives that focused on employee well-being, work-life balance, and giving back to the community. She knew that true success wasn't just about building wealth. It was about building relationships, supporting those who had supported her, and leaving a lasting impact on the world. As Eleanor dove deeper into these initiatives, she began to find a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just leading a company anymore. She was leading a movement that valued people, relationships, and a commitment to making the world a better place. And through it all, Mark remained by her side, supporting her every step of the way. Together, they traveled the world, meeting with industry leaders, speaking at conferences, and sharing their story. It was a story that resonated with people because it wasn't just about business. It was about overcoming adversity, embracing change, and finding the strength to keep going, no matter how many setbacks they had faced. Eventually, Eleanor's company became known not only for its success, but for its commitment to ethical business practices, community engagement, and innovation. It became a beacon of hope for others who were struggling to find their place in the world, proving that it was possible to succeed while still maintaining integrity and a sense of purpose. But through all the achievements and accolades, Eleanor knew that her greatest success was not the company she had built, but the life she had created with Mark. Together, they had overcome every obstacle, faced every challenge, and come out stronger on the other side. Their relationship, their partnership, had become the foundation of everything they had achieved. And as Eleanor looked back at everything she had accomplished, she realized that the journey was far from over. There was still more to do, more lives to touch, and more challenges to face. But whatever came next, she knew she would face it with Mark by her side. And that, more than anything, was the greatest achievement of all. As Eleanor and Mark moved forward, their vision for the future continued to evolve. The past had shaped them, strengthened them, and guided their every decision. But now, they were setting their sights on new horizons. They had rebuilt the company, restored its reputation, and redefined its core values. But for Eleanor, the road ahead was still unclear. She had found a new sense of balance, but she was still figuring out what her life outside of business would look like. Mark, ever supportive, stood by her side as she navigated this new chapter. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, enjoying a quiet moment away from the pressures of their busy lives, Eleanor looked out at the stars, a contemplative expression on her face. "I never thought I'd be in this place, Mark," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the stillness of the night. "I've spent so much of my life fighting for control, for success. But now, I feel like I'm at a crossroads. I've accomplished so much, but I'm not sure what comes next." Mark turned to her, his gaze full of understanding. "You've built something incredible, Eleanor. The company is thriving, You've overcome so much, and now you're free to decide what matters most to you. What do you want next? Eleanor took a deep breath, her heart heavy with the weight of her own thoughts. I'm not sure, she said quietly. I've been so focused on what I've had to do to survive, to build, that I've never really stopped to ask myself what I want. I've neglected parts of myself along the way, parts that I didn't even know were missing until now. Mark reached out and gently squeezed her hand. It's okay not to have all the answers right now, he said, his voice warm and reassuring. You've been through so much. You've earned the right to take a step back and think about what makes you truly happy. Whatever you choose, I'll be here. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Mark had been there every step of the way, offering her unwavering support, but never pushing her to be something she wasn't ready to be. She realized that she was ready to explore life beyond the confines of her company, but she also knew that it would take time. She needed to discover new passions, embrace the things that brought her joy, and figure out who she was when the business was no longer the driving force of her life. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor began to make small changes. She took time off from work, something she had never allowed herself to do before. She spent more time with family and friends, reconnecting with people she had lost touch with during the most intense years of her career. She traveled, something she had always wanted to do but never had the time for, and started exploring new hobbies. She even started volunteering at local charities, giving back to the community that had supported her during the toughest times. Eleanor had always been driven by a sense of responsibility, but now she was learning how to live in a way that was more balanced, where work didn't define her every decision. Mark was right by her side during this journey of self-discovery, encouraging her to step outside of her comfort zone and embrace the world beyond the office. Together, they explored new places, shared experiences, and found joy in the simple pleasures of life. As Eleanor began to rediscover herself, she found that the more she stepped back from the business, the clearer her vision for the future became. She had spent so many years trying to control everything around her, but now, she was learning to let go, to trust the process, and to embrace the unknown. The company was in good hands with the team they had built, and Eleanor knew that it was time for her to create space for new possibilities. She began thinking about ways to give back on a larger scale. The lessons she had learned, the struggles she had overcome, and the success she had achieved were not just for her benefit. They were for others as well. Eleanor started mentoring young entrepreneurs, particularly women who were trying to make their mark in the business world. She shared her story, not as a way to boast, but as a way to inspire others to keep going, no matter the obstacles. It was a new chapter for her, one where she could use her success to empower others to reach their full potential. Mark was supportive of her new direction, watching with pride as Eleanor stepped into this new role. He had always believed in her, but now, he saw her thriving in a way that was different from the businesswoman he had first met. She was still the strong, determined person he had fallen in love with, but now, there was a lightness to her, a joy that came from living a life that was fulfilling in every way. As Eleanor grew into her new role, she began to realize that her legacy wasn't just about the company she had built or the wealth she had accumulated. Her legacy was about the lives she had touched, the people she had inspired, and the change she had brought to the world. And as she looked ahead to the future, Eleanor knew that she was ready to embrace whatever came next. With Mark by her side, she was no longer afraid of the unknown. They had built a life together, one that was filled with love, trust, and shared dreams. And whatever challenges the future held, Eleanor knew that together, they could face them and continue to build a life that was meaningful, impactful, and filled with purpose. As Eleanor embraced her new journey, she found that peace didn't always come easily. The transition from a life dominated by business to one where she could focus on personal growth and purpose was not a smooth one. There were days when she doubted herself, when the weight of past decisions and sacrifices felt too heavy to bear. She would wake up in the mornings, staring out the window, thinking about how much she had given up to get to this point. There were moments when she wondered if she was losing touch with the very things that made her the person she was, the driven, focused businesswoman who had built an empire from nothing. Mark, as always, was there by her side, supporting her without question. He saw the shifts in her, understood the internal battles she faced, but he never pushed her. He allowed her the space to grow at her own pace. And in many ways, this patience was exactly what she needed. "You're allowed to have these moments, Eleanor," Mark said one evening as they sat together, enjoying the calm of their home. "The past you've built is part of who you are, but it doesn't define you anymore. You don't have to carry all that weight on your shoulders." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She knew he was right, but she still struggled to let go of the things that had brought her this far. "I've always been the one to push forward, to make things happen," she admitted. "But now, I'm not sure what's next. I feel like I'm in uncharted waters, and sometimes it's scary." Mark gently took her hand in his, giving her a reassuring smile. "You've already proven that you're capable of anything, and you're not alone in this. I'm with you every step of the way. Whatever you decide next, we'll face it together." As the days went by, Eleanor allowed herself more space to explore what came next. She began to spend more time with friends she had neglected over the years, reconnecting with the world outside of the company. The simple joys of life, long walks, meaningful conversations, and spontaneous trips, brought her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known she was missing. She also started volunteering at local organizations, offering her experience to guide young women entrepreneurs. This new sense of purpose, combined with her renewed personal life, was slowly transforming her. Eleanor's influence, once solely focused on the company, was now spreading to the lives of those she mentored and the communities she served. She realized that her legacy wasn't just about building wealth. It was about empowering others, especially women, to take control of their own futures and create something meaningful. Mark watched with pride as Eleanor blossomed into this new role, stepping back from the demands of the company to embrace the passions she had always put aside. They spent weekends traveling, experiencing new places, and enjoying each other's company in ways they never had before. The relationship between them deepened, and Mark saw a side of Eleanor that had been buried under years of work. She was becoming more open, more relaxed, and more willing to embrace joy without guilt. One day, as they sat together on a beach, the sun setting on the horizon, Eleanor turned to Mark with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think I'm making the right choice, Mark?" she asked, her voice gentle, leaving behind so much to focus on this new path. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "Eleanor, you've always known what's best for you, even when it didn't seem clear at the time. You've built an incredible legacy, but now you're building something even more important, a life that's not just about success, but about happiness and fulfillment. I believe you're exactly where you need to be." Eleanor smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She had spent so long proving herself in the business world, fighting for success and control, but now she realized that true success was about balance, about finding joy in the journey and allowing herself to be present in the moments that truly mattered. As the months went by, Eleanor began to speak more publicly about the importance of work-life balance and the need for leaders to prioritize their mental and emotional health. She became a sought-after speaker, sharing her story of resilience, not just in business, but in life. She encouraged others to embrace their vulnerabilities, to ask for help, and to create space for the things that brought them joy. Her message resonated deeply with people, and she began to build a platform for herself as a mentor, a coach, and an advocate for positive change in the workplace. Meanwhile, the company continued to thrive, but now Eleanor was able to take a step back, confident in the team she had built and the values they upheld. She no longer felt the need to control every aspect of the business. She had learned to trust her team, to delegate, and to let go. The company flourished under the leadership of those who shared her vision and values, and the employees felt empowered to lead with the same passion and integrity Eleanor had instilled in them. One evening, after another successful company event, Eleanor and Mark sat on the balcony, reflecting on how far they had come. The city lights sparkled below, but it was the quiet peace between them that mattered most. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Eleanor said, her voice filled with contentment. Mark smiled, his hand resting on hers. "We have. And I wouldn't change a thing. You've created something extraordinary, Eleanor. And now, you're creating something even more beautiful, your own happiness." Eleanor looked out at the horizon, her heart full. She had finally found the balance she had been searching for, the balance between ambition and peace, between success and fulfillment. She knew that the journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever came next. With Mark by her side, she was ready to embrace the future one step at a time. As Eleanor stepped further into this new chapter of her life, she began to feel a sense of calm she had never experienced before. It was as though the chaos of the past was fading into the distance, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose that allowed her to see the world around her in a completely new light. The company, which once consumed every ounce of her energy, was now in the hands of a dedicated and capable team. She had learned to trust her employees, delegate with confidence, and even let go of the control she had once so tightly grasped. But more than that, Eleanor had learned to trust herself. She had come to understand that success wasn't just about achievements or accolades. It was about finding balance, maintaining her integrity, and, most importantly, nurturing the relationships that mattered. Mark, as always, remained by her side, offering unwavering support. Their bond had only grown stronger with time. The partnership they had built, not only in business but in life, had become a foundation on which they both stood. Eleanor had never imagined that the simple act of stepping back would bring so much peace. But as she allowed herself to embrace a life beyond the office, she found herself more fulfilled than ever before. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset, Eleanor reflected on how far they had come. "Mark, do you ever think about what we've been through?" she asked, her voice soft, almost contemplative. Mark looked over at her, a small smile on his face. "All the time," he said, his tone filled with warmth. "It's hard not to. We've faced so much, challenges that seemed impossible. But here we are, stronger and more connected than ever." Eleanor nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "I used to think success was just about achieving something, about getting to a certain point. But now, I see that it's about how we get there and who we become in the process. I feel like I'm finally becoming the person I was always meant to be." Mark reached over, taking her hand in his fingers gently brushing against hers. "You've always been that person, Eleanor. It just took you a while to realize it. But now that you're here, I think you've found your true purpose." Eleanor smiled, her eyes filled with emotion. "I think you're right. I'm finally starting to see it, too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply enjoying the peace and serenity that had replaced the chaos. Eleanor had learned to savor these moments, understanding that life was not just about pushing forward, but about appreciating the present. She had built an empire, yes, but more importantly, she had built a life filled with love, trust, and meaningful connections. As time passed, Eleanor began to focus more on giving back. She started speaking at conferences and workshops, sharing her story with others who were on their own journeys. She mentored young women entrepreneurs, helping them navigate the challenges of starting their own businesses. Her experiences, both the triumphs and the struggles, resonated deeply with those who heard her speak. She became an advocate for mental health in the workplace, encouraging others to prioritize well-being alongside success. Her message was clear. Success was not just about money, power, or prestige. It was about living a life that aligned with one's values and passions. Mark supported her in every endeavor, attending her talks, helping her with her initiatives, and always being her rock when she needed it. Together, they traveled the world, speaking to audiences, attending events, and sharing their message of resilience and purpose. It was a new chapter for them both, one that felt more fulfilling than anything they had experienced before. And as they looked ahead, they both knew that this journey was just beginning. Eleanor had always been focused on building her legacy through the company, but now she was building something even more meaningful, her legacy through the lives she touched. She had come full circle, from a woman who once saw only success in business to someone who understood that real success was about making a difference in the world, about creating opportunities for others, and about living authentically. As they sat on the porch that evening, Eleanor felt a sense of deep contentment wash over her. She was no longer driven by fear or the need to prove herself. She was driven by love, purpose, and the desire to leave the world better than she had found it. And with Mark by her side, she knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, together, as a team, and with the strength of their shared commitment to each other and to the future they were building. Whatever came next, Eleanor was ready. She had found her balance, and with it, she had found peace. Mark squeezed her hand gently, and Eleanor smiled at him, knowing that the road ahead would be full of new adventures. But no matter what, they would face them with the same resilience and love that had carried them this far. As Eleanor and Mark continued to navigate this new phase of their lives, they found that the lessons they had learned from their struggles in the business world applied just as much to their personal lives. The calm they had both found was not just a result of their accomplishments, but of their ability to trust each other completely, something that had grown stronger over time. They had faced adversity and had come out on top, but they both knew the true test was not in what they had achieved, but in how they moved forward from there. Eleanor, with her usual drive, started to think more about the legacy she wanted to leave behind, not just in terms of business, but in terms of her impact on the world around her. It wasn't about power or wealth anymore. It was about creating opportunities for others, especially women, to rise and succeed. Mark could see the shift in her. He saw the way she spoke about the future, the way she mentored others, and how she was now looking at the bigger picture of life, beyond the company she had built. Eleanor had always been focused on taking control and achieving success on her terms, but now she was finding joy in empowering others to do the same. She wanted to create spaces where people, especially women, could take ownership of their futures, just as she had. It became her new mission. Together, they traveled more often, speaking at conferences and workshops. Eleanor had begun to take a leadership role in several initiatives that aimed to support women entrepreneurs. She was not just talking about the importance of work-life balance or mental well-being anymore. She was actively building a community, creating a network of like-minded individuals who could support one another. One afternoon, while in a meeting with her team, Eleanor shared her vision for the future of the company. "We've built something extraordinary here," she said, looking around the room at the people who had helped her reach this point. "But it's time to think bigger. I want to start investing in initiatives that help young entrepreneurs, particularly women, break through the barriers that are still holding them back." Her team nodded in agreement, excited by the possibilities. Eleanor was no longer the only one driving the company's success. She had built a team that was as passionate and dedicated as she was, and now, they were all united in this new vision for the future. They worked together to create mentorship programs, business incubators, and networking events that would offer the support and resources that entrepreneurs needed to thrive. The company began to be known not only for its business success, but also for its commitment to giving back. Eleanor's focus had shifted from merely maintaining a company to creating something that would leave a lasting impact on future generations. She realized that her true legacy would be measured not by the profits she made or the empire she built, but by the lives she touched, the opportunities she created, and the change she inspired in others. One evening, after a particularly successful event where young women entrepreneurs had come together to share their stories and ideas, Eleanor sat with Mark in their favorite spot in their home, looking out at the city lights. She smiled to herself, reflecting on the day. "You know, Mark," she said, her voice filled with contentment, "I never imagined this is where I'd be. It's not just about building a company anymore. It's about giving others the tools they need to build their own futures." Mark smiled back at her, proud of everything she had accomplished. "You've always had the vision, Eleanor. It's just that now, you're using it to help others. You've turned your success into something so much bigger than just yourself." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. "I never would have been able to do any of this without you, Mark. You've been my rock, my biggest supporter, and I'm so grateful to have you by my side." Mark kissed the top of her head, holding her close. "And I'm grateful for you. You've taught me so much, Eleanor. About resilience, about purpose, and most of all, about love." As they sat in the quiet, the city humming in the background, Eleanor realized that her journey was still unfolding. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt truly ready for whatever came next. She had found a balance between ambition and peace, between work and life, and she was living the life she had always dreamed of, not just in terms of success, but in the way she connected with the world around her. She had found her purpose, and now, with Mark by her side, she was ready to help others find theirs. Together, they had built something that was far more meaningful than a company. They had built a legacy that would inspire generations to come. As Eleanor stood at the edge of this new chapter, reflecting on all that she had accomplished, a profound sense of fulfillment settled over her. The journey she had traveled, from a young woman driven solely by ambition to a successful businesswoman and a mentor for others, had been nothing short of transformative. She had faced trials that had tested her resolve, and through it all, she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of what truly mattered. She wasn't the same person who had first entered the business world, overwhelmed by pressure and consumed by the need to prove herself. Now, she was someone who understood that success wasn't just about achieving financial gain or building an empire. It was about the legacy you left behind, the lives you impacted, and the personal fulfillment that came from living in alignment with your values. It wasn't just about building a business. It was about creating a community, empowering others, and using your success to inspire and uplift those around you. As she reflected on her journey, Eleanor found herself feeling grateful for every challenge, every victory, and, most importantly, the love and support she had received along the way. Mark had been her constant, her rock through every hardship and triumph. Together, they had not only built a successful business, but had created a life filled with love, trust, and mutual respect. Their bond had grown deeper with time, and they had learned to balance their professional aspirations with their personal needs. Eleanor's heart swelled with gratitude as she looked at Mark, sitting next to her, sharing in the peace they had found together. "We've come so far, haven't we?" she said, her voice filled with emotion. Mark turned to her, his eyes warm with affection. "We have. But more importantly, Eleanor, we've built something that truly matters. Not just a company, but a life, a future, together." His words resonated with her, and for the first time, she realized that everything she had fought for, everything she had worked for, had led her here, to this moment, to this life, with him. As they sat together in quiet contentment, Eleanor thought about the next steps in her journey. She no longer felt the need to control everything. The company was in capable hands, and her role had shifted from being the sole leader to one of a guiding mentor, someone who could help others rise and thrive, just as she had done. The young women entrepreneurs she mentored had become her new focus. She had built an empire, yes, but her real legacy was in helping others create their own paths to success. She had learned to give without expecting anything in return, to find joy in seeing others succeed, and to understand that the truest form of success was the impact you had on the world around you. Mark, too, had embraced this shift. He had become not just a partner in business, but a partner in life. Together, they had built a life that was full, fulfilling, and meaningful, not just in terms of professional success, but in the personal connections they had nurtured. As the seasons changed and the company continued to grow, Eleanor felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She was no longer driven by the relentless pursuit of success or by the pressure to prove herself. Instead, she was driven by a desire to live a life that was true to her values, a life that was filled with purpose, love, and connection. The work she had done, the people she had helped, and the lives she had touched were her greatest accomplishments. And as she looked ahead, she knew that the journey wasn't over. There were still challenges to face, still goals to achieve, and still a world to change. But she was ready for whatever came next. Because now, she understood that true success wasn't just about the destination, it was about the journey itself. And as long as Mark was by her side, she knew she could face anything. The road ahead was full of possibility, full of new opportunities to make a difference. And with each passing day, Eleanor realized that the greatest legacy she could leave was not in the companies she built, but in the lives she touched, the people she empowered, and the love she shared. Together, Eleanor and Mark had built a future that was brighter than either of them had ever imagined. They had proven that when you put love, trust, and integrity first, success follows naturally. And as they looked forward to the future, they knew that together, they were unstoppable. I have found inspiration in many millionaire stories, but none more powerful than the one of a woman who, through struggle and resilience, built not only a business empire, but a life that was fulfilling beyond her wildest dreams. In this remarkable millionaire story, Eleanor's journey teaches us that success isn't just about money. It's about creating a lasting legacy and making a difference in the lives of others. Her story reminds us that every challenge we face is an opportunity for growth, and that personal happiness can be found in giving back, helping others achieve their dreams, and embracing love and trust. This millionaire story takes us through the highs and lows of building an empire, overcoming obstacles, and finding peace and purpose in life. Eleanor's transformation from a driven businesswoman to a mentor for young entrepreneurs exemplifies the power of resilience and the importance of giving back. As we dive into her journey, we explore how her millionaire story isn't just about financial gain, but the impact she's had on the world and the people around her. Her legacy shows us that millionaire stories are about more than wealth. They are about finding balance, purpose, and happiness. The way Eleanor and Mark support each other, and the way they have built something far beyond just a business, highlights how true success is measured by the lives we touch. As you listen to this inspiring millionaire story, you'll discover that achieving success is a deeply personal journey, and that with the right support and vision, anyone can create their own millionaire story that is not just about the destination, but about the meaningful experiences along the way.